Born in about 1847 in Potsdam in Prussia, Germany, Albert Smidt was educated and intelligent man who had received in his youth a good deal of religious instruction. Queensland continued to encourage European immigration, with a focus on assisted migration from Britain and other parts of Europe. This wave of immigration was influenced by various factors in both Queensland and Germany, such as economic prospects and political unrest in Germany. By 1891, Germans had become the largest group of non-British settlers in Queensland, numbering nearly 15,000. Smidt claimed he had arrived in Queensland during this time. In Australia, he was an itinerant miner, prospector, and rural worker. In 1888, Smidt possibly worked as a fisherman on the Murrumbidgee River in the vicinity of Gundagai. He stood around 5 feet 4 inches tall, 1.63 meters, had a medium build, and was tending to have a fair complexion with a low forehead, receding hairline, grey eyes, and a small moustache and beard. On Wednesday, October 17, 1888, Richard Whittaker, a farmer from Gellingro station, was fishing in the Murrumbidgee River about half a mile from his home. He found a headless, naked body of a man stuck on a log in the river. Richard reported it to the police in Gundagai, and Constable Nixon was sent to investigate. Nixon quickly figured out that the man had been murdered by someone experienced. The man's head had been cut off with 2 distinct cuts, and there were signs of a struggle on his back and arms. Nixon tied the body with ropes to remove it from the river. It was very swollen and had likely been in the water for less than 3 weeks. The man was thought to be under 30, about 5 feet 4 inches tall, and looked healthy and muscular. No sign of the head or clothing was found, and no one had reported a missing person in the area, suggesting the man was a stranger. The murder of this unidentified man in 1888, found decapitated in the river, remained unsolved. In April 1890, Albert Smidt was arrested for killing his companion, John Young Taylor. Smidt had also cut off Taylor's head and buried it separately, leading to speculation that he might be connected to the earlier murder at Gellingro. After Smidt's arrest, Inspector Charles Harrison from Wagga looked into his possible link to the Gellingro murder and the disappearance of another companion, Jacob Rick. In May 1890, reports indicated that police had information proving Smidt was near Gundagai when the Gellingro murder happened. It was also noted that he had worked as a fisherman on the Murrumbidgee River before being seen with Taylor. However, Smidt's connection to the Gellingro murder remained uncertain. John Young Taylor and Jacob Rick were miners and prospectors living in Rushworth, in the Campaspe district of northern central Victoria. Taylor was born in about 1830 in the Yetholm parish of Roxburghshire, Scotland, near the border with England. He had emigrated to the colony of Victoria by the mid-1850s during the gold rush era, and eventually settled at Rushworth. He was 5 feet 11 inches in height, with grey hair. Jacob Rick was born in about 1835 in Hochkirch in Württemberg, Germany. He had been a resident of Rushworth in Victoria from 1870, where he followed mining pursuits. Rick was described as a man who was short of stature, stout, of ruddy complexion, with a high forehead, black curly hair, the mark of an abscess, on the left side of his head, and a full black beard. On October 23rd, they left Rushworth, drawn by news of a gold rush in the Parks district of central western New South Wales. In Peak Hill, north of Parks, they met Alfred Smidt and began to work and travel with him. Soon after, disappointed with the gold prospects at Peak Hill, Taylor, Rick, Smidt, and another man named Tubbenhaw decided to move on. They left Peak Hill in November 1889, travelling in a horse-drawn wagonette to Good Friday Gully near Young in inland southeastern New South Wales, where they started working an old claim. After 4 days, Taylor went back to Peak Hill to retrieve Rick's belongings and then returned to Rushworth. 9 days later, Rick, Smidt, and Tubbenhaw abandoned the claim at Good Friday Gully. The wagonette was sent to Young for repairs, and afterward, The three miners travelled to old diggings south of Young between Wombat and Murrumborough, arriving on December 6th to set up camp. For the next 8 days, they worked for a local farmer harvesting crops. Eventually, Tubbenhar left, and Rick and Smidt headed to the Wee Jasper district, east of Gundagai, an area familiar to Smidt. In Wee Jasper, a local tradesman named Frank Gardner repaired one of the wagonette's wheels. Rick and Smidt then drove the vehicle 8 miles to Anderson's place, in the hilly area west of Wee Jasper village, arriving on Christmas Day. They left the wagonette there, loaded a pack horse, and told Anderson they planned to prospect at Smith's old diggings on Sandy Creek, about 5 miles away in the Bungongo district. The two men were not seen again until the evening of December 31st, when they camped at Shaking Bog Crossing on a Jungbilly Creek, near Thomas Bell's selection, and 5 miles from Anderson's place. The next day, January 1st, 1890, a local miner named Margoles Kainitz took them to a promising prospecting site in Garner's Paddock in the Tumarama district. They were seen by other miners shortly after noon on New Year's Day. Rick and Smidt only prospected there for about an hour before moving on later that afternoon. Subsequent police investigations suggested that Jacob Rick was likely murdered by Smidt later on January 1st, as the prospecting site in Garner's Paddock was the last place Rick was known to be alive. Around 4 p.m. that same day, Smidt, alone and leading the pack horse, stopped at Bell's place to buy some butter. He then made his way to Anderson's place, arriving there in the evening. When Anderson later spoke to the police, he recalled Smith's excited manner. When asked about Rick, Smidt claimed he has gone to Gundagai and taken the train to Victoria. Although Anderson urged him to stay because it was late, Smidt insisted he was in a great hurry, hitched the horse to the wagonette, and left. That night, Smidt camped at his previous site at Shaking Bog Crossing. The next morning, January 2nd, he sold his tent to a local miner. The following day, he was seen at Kylie's place, 8 miles along a Jungbilly Creek. Over the next few days, Smidt was observed moving up and down the creek suspiciously before returning to Kylie's to attempt to sell the wagonette unsuccessfully. Smidt then drove the wagonette to Tumut via Brungle Creek, where he camped in Mackay's hotel yard. At Tumut, he attempted to sell the wagonette again, but was unsuccessful. He then moved on to Adelong, where he was also unable to find a buyer for the vehicle. He continued to Hillis's Creek, located between Gundagai and Tarcoota, before heading southwest on the Great Southern Road toward Albury on the Victorian border. While travelling toward the border, Smidt camped for a day on a reserve near Bownor. During this time, a group of boys swimming nearby saw him busily washing an opossum rug and removing marks from the bottom of his wagon. After Smidt left, the boys discovered bloodstains on a log near where the wagon had been. On January 11th, Smidt arrived at Good's Wine Shop at 8 Mile Creek, 8 miles from Albury on the Sydney Road, where he stayed until the 18th. He left the wagonette with Good and asked him to sell both the wagon and the horse if he could find a buyer. He then took a coach to Albury, telling Good he planned to head to Victoria. After Smidt entered Victoria at Albury in January 1890, he made his way to Rushworth, where he stayed at a hotel for a few days while he located Taylor's residence. He then reconnected with Taylor, closely following him. Eventually, Smidt convinced Taylor to head to the Tumbarumba diggings, claiming there was abundant gold to be found through sluicing. Taylor bought a new dray, a red wagonette with a white canvas canopy, and 2 horses. They left Rushworth around February 23rd for Tumbarumba, located on the western edge of the Snowy Mountains. In March, they reached the Wee Jasper district, but Taylor was unimpressed with the area's appearance, prompting them to leave shortly after. By late March 1890, Taylor and Smidt travelled from Tumut towards Wagga Wagga. On April 1st, they arrived at George King's farm in Cunningdrew, 12 miles, 19 kilometres, east of Wagga Wagga. Taylor and King, Friends for a decade discussed Taylor's intention to sell his dray, since maintaining two vehicles was not cost-effective. 2 days later, they set off for Wagga in the red wagonette, with Taylor informing King they would return on Easter Monday, April 7th. They stayed at James Kerr's Wagga Hotel for 4 nights, sleeping in the wagonette. When Taylor settled the bill on Monday morning, he mentioned his plans to return to King's Farm to rest the horses for a week or two. Taylor and Smidt departed from Kerr's Hotel in the red wagonette around mid-morning on Easter Monday, April 7th, 1890, to visit George King in Cunningdrew. They drove half a mile along Edward Street and stopped at Eupenlatz's Viaduct Hotel, where they lingered for over 3 hours. During their visit, Taylor drank quite a bit, treating several people, while Smidt limited himself to 1 drink, choosing not to mimic his friend. When they left the Viaduct Hotel, Taylor was intoxicated, and Smidt took the wheel. Next, they stopped at the Farmer's Home Hotel on the Tarcutta Road towards Alfredtown, where they stayed for approximately 15 minutes. Taylor had a brandy, and Smidt opted for a shandy gaff. The publican, Grace Tillett, later testified that she refused to serve Taylor another drink, believing he had had enough, although he remained cheerful and in good spirits. Upon reaching Costello's Hotel in Alfredtown, they stopped again, with Taylor consuming 2 glasses of pale brandy and Smidt having 2 small shandy gaffs. After leaving the hotel around 2:30 p.m., Taylor was driving, while Smidt sat behind in the vehicle. From the Alfredtown Hotel, King's Farm was 3 miles further along the Tarcutta Road. Witnesses and wheel tracks indicated that Taylor and Smidt maintained a steady pace toward George King's farm. About 200 yards from the farm, at a spot not visible from the house, the wagonette turned around and headed back toward Alfredtown. Near this location, several pools of blood were discovered on the road. Witnesses later recalled seeing the red wagonette returning at a fast trot, driven by Smidt. He stopped at a house along the road owned by Caroline Homer and her husband, dismounting to ask Mrs. Homer if she had any eggs for sale. After learning she did not, he inquired about local roads, asking how he could reach Junay without going through Wagga. When she informed him that he would need to pass through town, he asked about accessing the Sydney Road without retracing his steps. He also inquired about a road leading to the cemetery and Lake Albert. While they spoke, Caroline noticed something dark falling from the back of the wagonette onto the road, resembling blood. Smidt then drove the wagonette off the main road onto a branch road leading south to Lake Albert. Around 6 o'clock that evening, Smidt stopped beside the Lake Albert Road, about 2.5 miles from the Tarcutta Road. Approximately 100 yards away was the campsite of John Meffam and 2 other labourers working for Gideon Watson on bridge and road projects. According to his later testimony, Meffam observed Smidt scraping out something with his feet, gathering dirt with his hands, and appearing to caulk the bottom of the wagonette. Later that night, around 9:30, Meffam heard horses and saw Smidt driving the wagonette away. Suspicious, Meffam examined the spot where the wagonette had been. Lighting a match, he discovered what looked like bloodstains on the ground. He decided to postpone further investigation until morning, when he found additional bloodstains in the area. He informed his employer, who promptly reported the suspicious activity to the Wagga police. Senior Constable Henry Dixon and Constable Davidson were dispatched to investigate. Upon their arrival, they found trails of blood along the Lake Albert Road and at various locations where Smidt had stopped. They traced the wagonette's wheel marks back to the railway gates, where the tracks were lost. After leaving the area near the road workers' camp, Smidt drove onto a nearby lane that ran alongside the Tarcutta Road, where he set up camp with his horses and vehicle for the night. The next morning, he drove back through Wagga and crossed the bridge to North Wagga. At 7 o'clock, he stopped at the Caledonian Hotel on the Junay Road and bought a bag of chaff from the owner. By mid-afternoon on Tuesday, April 8th, Smidt reached Old Juney and stopped at Samuel Story's store to buy a spade, saying it was for digging post holes. Story later said that Smidt seemed quite calm and collected. Smidt then crossed Hooligans Creek in front of the store and camped on the other side, where he could still see the store. Later, while Story was catching a sheep, he noticed Smidt watching him. On the morning of Wednesday, April 9th, Senior Constable Dixon took a train to Juney, suspecting that Smidt had travelled along the Tamora Road toward Old Juney. Accompanied by Senior Constable Anderson from the Juney Police, Dixon headed toward Old Juney. After about a mile, he spotted Smidt approaching, driving Taylor's wagonette with one horse hitched in the shafts and another tied at the back. Dixon questioned Smidt about Taylor's whereabouts and how he came to have the horses and the vehicle. Smidt's unsatisfactory answers led to Dixon arresting him for being in possession of 2 horses and a wagonette reasonably believed to be stolen and the property of John Young Taylor. Upon inspecting the wagonette, Dixon discovered a spade with what looked like blood on it and a tomahawk with some hair and blood stains. Smidt was handcuffed and Dixon took the reins, proceeding at a moderate pace toward Wagga. Midway between Old Juney and Wagga, Dixon stopped at the Wallistown Dam to let the horses drink. Dixon grabbed a bucket from the back of the wagonette and instructed Smidt to lead the rear horse to the water's edge. While Dixon was filling the bucket, Smidt, standing 2 yards away, suddenly turned and attempted to cut his throat with a razor in one hand and a penknife in the other. Despite his very determined attempt, Smidt only created a 2-inch wound beneath his chin with the penknife before Dixon rushed over, tackled him to the ground, and disarmed him. A drover with some sheep nearby offered help, and his cook was sent to Wagga to get a doctor for Smidt, who was bleeding heavily. Handkerchiefs were wrapped around the wound, but Smidt later tore off the bandages and even attempted to pull his windpipe out with his finger before they secured his hands and strapped him to his body. About 8 miles from Wagga, Dixon was joined by Mounted Constable Jackson. As they continued toward town, they heard a slight gunshot, and Dixon turned to see smoke coming from Smidt's mouth. The prisoner, lying in the vehicle on a possum rug, had somehow obtained a 6-chambered pinfire revolver and shot himself in the mouth. The bullet passed through the left side of his tongue, travelled around his jaw, and exited near the back of his head by the ear. Following this incident, the policeman hurried along the road with Smidt. At O'Donnell's Caledonian Hotel, 2 miles from Wagga, they were met by Inspector Harrison and Police Magistrate Henry Bayliss. By then, Smidt had lost consciousness. Dr. Druitt arrived shortly after to stitch the wounds, and Smidt was taken to the hospital in Wagga, where a constant watch was maintained by relays of constables, who relieved each other every 4 hours. After Smidt was arrested, searches began to find Taylor's body. Constables were dispatched along Smidt's route, and every possible location was thoroughly searched. On Saturday, April 11th, Senior Constable Dixon discovered Taylor's head buried near Smidt's campsite by Hooligans Creek just before Smidt's arrest. Recent rain had swollen the watercourse near the campsite. While searching the area about 60 yards from the campsite, Dixon found a boot mark on the bank and noticed that the ground was spongy. With help from Samuel Story, the local storekeeper, Dixon diverted the water and began digging carefully with a shovel. Within minutes, he uncovered a human head that appeared to have been recently buried. The head had been roughly severed from the body, with jagged, torn flesh. Covered in blood and mud, it was placed in a canvas bag and taken to the Juney police station before being transported by train to Wagga. On April 12th, George King identified the head at the Wagga lockup as that of his old and close friend. Other local witnesses also confirmed it was John Young Taylor's head. Following the discovery, attention turned to the area around Smidt's campsite near Old Juney. That afternoon, Senior Constable Anderson from the Juney Police, along with Narrandera black tracker Richard Weston and several civilians, conducted a thorough search. A young man named Cooney found a spot about 50 yards from Smith's camp where the ground looked recently disturbed and alerted the police. Anderson dug with a spade and uncovered the body, which was buried just 2 feet deep. The body was mostly unclothed, except for a pair of socks. An examination of the campfire ashes revealed shirt studs, buttons, and remnants of clothing. The body was transported by mail train to Wagga, arriving on the morning of Sunday, April 12th. It was taken to the police barracks where Dr. Thomas Hillis and Dr. Claire Long conducted a post-mortem examination confirming the connection between the two separate body parts. By this time, the body had significantly decomposed and was emitting a strong odor. The victim had wounds and skull fractures, likely inflicted by the back of a tomahawk, but these injuries were not deemed sufficient to cause immediate death. The doctors concluded that Taylor died from hemorrhage rather than from the head injuries. Notably, the body was completely devoid of blood, and the heart cavity was found to be entirely bloodless. Evidence suggested that when Taylor's throat was cut, several smaller arteries, namely the facial, linal, and thyroid, were severed, but the carotid artery remained intact, resulting in a slow bleed. Decapitation occurred the next day near Old Junee, after which death had taken place and the body was drained of blood. The findings from the post-mortem led to the conclusion that Taylor's throat was cut late on the afternoon of April 7th, allowing the victim to bleed slowly to death, which may not have happened until the following day. This conclusion was supported by the numerous blood patches found along the route taken by Smidt in the wagonette. While in custody at Wagga Hospital, Smidt was regularly visited by the Presbyterian minister, Reverend John McIntyre, who deliberately avoided discussing the murder. However, after the head and body of the victim were found, Smidt appeared very restless, suggesting he believed the mystery of the murder had been solved. On the night of April 14th, he expressed his desire to explain the circumstances of the crime to Reverend McIntyre and Inspector Harrison. The following morning, the two men visited Smidt to hear his confession, which took nearly 2 hours to document. According to Smidt, his mate Jack had begun arguing with him after they left the hotel in Alfredtown. He claimed Taylor remarked that he was not a good driver and did not know how to use a horse, and then struck him several times, saying he was no good. Smidt stated, "I was going to hit him, but he guarded off and gave me another clout, and in a moment I got a tomahawk and hit him on the head." He recounted how Taylor fell onto the road and how he lifted him up and saw the poor fellow was dead. Initially, Smidt intended to hide the body near Lake Albert, but changed his mind due to a nearby work party. The next morning, he drove into Wagga, crossed the Murrumbidgee, and headed northeast toward Old Junee, with Taylor's body concealed in the wagonette. By mid-afternoon, he arrived in Old Junee, where he bought a spade at a store. He then followed a gully outside the town, camping a distance from the road near an old crossing. During the night, he undressed the corpse and took the poor man's head off, because I thought he would not be recognized when they found him in the hole. He buried Taylor's body beside the gully and the head a short distance away, about 10 or 12 yards further up on the same side, closer to the bank. Afterward, he burned the clothes and tried to clean the blood from the vehicle. In his confession, Smidt mentioned his intention to return the horse and wagonette to Kerr's place near Wagga, then give myself up and confess my sin to a clergyman, and afterwards shoot myself or cut my throat. After obtaining Smith's statement, Inspector Harrison informed a local newspaper reporter that he did not consider the prisoner's account reliable. He was confident that the police had a perfect chain of evidence to convict Smidt without needing to rely on his confession for details. The inquest into John Young Taylor's death was initially set for April 21st, but Smith's health worsened due to an abscess from a bullet wound, prompting concerns about his possible involvement in the disappearance of Jacob Rick, a companion of Taylor. The inquest was postponed until the following Monday, when Smith's condition improved. On April 28th, he was charged with possession of stolen horses and a wagonette and appeared in court looking pale and emaciated. During the inquest, witnesses recounted interactions with Smidt around the time of the murder, and details of his arrest and confession were presented. Smidt claimed he did not intend to kill Taylor, thinking he was already dead when he cut his throat. The coroner concluded that the evidence pointed to Smidt's guilt, leading the jury to find that Taylor was willfully murdered by him on April 7th or 8th. Smidt was committed for trial in September 1890. After the inquest, Reverend John McIntyre visited Smidt, who broke down when questioned about Rick, initially claiming ignorance but later admitting to knowing him. Smidt expressed a desire to die, stating it was enough to die for one man. On April 29th, he was transferred to Goulburn Jail for better security until his trial. Smidt remained at Goulburn Jail, which had better facilities for his security, until his trial in September. In late May 1890, Senior Constable Dixon from Wagga led a team of officers and Aboriginal trackers to search for Jacob Rick's body in the Wee Jasper area. Their efforts were hindered by ongoing rain. They began at Higgins Camp on a Jungbilly Creek and followed the creek to Shaking Bog Crossing, closely examining all holes and tunnels along the way, although the rough terrain made a thorough search challenging. At Shaking Bog Crossing, they located the site where Smidt and Rick had worked, as pointed out by local miner Margules Kynitz. They searched various mining holes and cleared sand from several races, but found nothing. After this unsuccessful search, Senior Constable Dixon attempted to trace Smidt's route, as local innkeepers and residents easily recognized a photograph of Smidt. Additionally, the peculiar design of Smidt's wagonette made it easy to track. On June 8, 1890, Dixon arrived at Good's wine shop at 8 Mile Creek near Albury. While inspecting the wagonette left there, he found not only picks and mining tools, but also a blood-stained tomahawk and a possum skin rug with a large patch of what appeared to be dried blood, similar to how he had handled Taylor's body. Following Smidt's arrest in April, police discovered a silver watch in his possession, which he claimed was his. Investigations revealed that the inscription on the watch matched one sold to Rick by a watchmaker in Rushworth. The Wagga Circuit Court began its sessions on September 26, 1890, with Justice Sir Charles Innes presiding over Alfred Smidt's trial for the willful murder of John Young Taylor. Smidt pleaded not guilty, and since he had no legal representation, Barrister W. Whitfield was assigned to defend him, assisted by solicitor Harry B. Fitzhardinge. The trial was postponed to September 29th for defense preparation. When the trial resumed, the prosecution's evidence mirrored that presented during the earlier inquest, and no defense evidence was offered. Whitfield delivered a strong defense, urging the jury to consider a manslaughter verdict. However, Justice Innes pointed out inconsistencies in Smidt's statements that suggested attempts to exonerate himself. After deliberating for about 20 minutes, the jury found Smidt guilty of willful murder, and the judge sentenced him to death, describing the crime as cold-blooded. Following the trial, the Wagga Municipal Council petitioned the New South Wales Minister of Justice to have Smidt's execution moved elsewhere, citing public concern about the hangings in a small jail. The minister declined to change the execution arrangements, and November 18th was set as the execution date. On the morning of November 18th, a scaffold was erected in the jail yard, discreetly constructed to minimize noise and visibility. At shortly after 9 a.m., Smidt was executed. He was given a good breakfast, and Archdeacon Pownall attended to perform last rites. After being led to the scaffold, a white cap was placed over his face, and the noose was tightened. The trap was sprung, resulting in an instantaneous death. Later that afternoon, Smidt's body was placed in a coffin and buried in unconsecrated ground at the town cemetery.